Hi, I'm Mark Cunningham with Grace Property Management. If you're a tenant or a rental property owner in Colorado, you need to be aware of a new bill that recently passed the Colorado legislature, HB 24-1318, which really is pretty impactful because it changes the way modifications are made and who pays for things on rental properties when a modification is made to a property for a tenant who has a disability. So per HUD, that's the Federal Bureau, HUD, the rule has always been the same. The rule has always been, and it continues to be this: landlords must allow reasonable modifications to properties for tenants with disabilities. Meaning, we're a property management company. If a tenant comes into our office and they say, hey, I'm in a wheelchair, and that property that I rented, it's got 2 steps up to the front door. I can't get up those steps in my wheelchair without a lot of difficulty, so I would like to install a wheelchair ramp. Okay, so HUD has federal guidelines that put us through what is typically like a 3 criteria test that we have to put the situation through to determine whether or not we will allow the installation of a wheelchair ramp. And it's pretty straightforward. There has to be a disability. There has to be what's called a legal nexus between the disability request and the person who has the disability, meaning if you're in a wheelchair ramp, if you're in a wheelchair, will the wheelchair ramp offset that disability? Yes, it will. And then number 3 is the request reasonable. So it's pretty straightforward. It really, really is. It may sound complex, but it's really, really not. So any request we get, we have to put through that 3 criteria test. And what we can't say is, no, I'm not going to allow that. That would be violating federal law because people that have disabilities, and they can be physical or emotional, we have to provide that for. So HUD also has said this, and they still say this. HUD says, hey, yes, you have to allow the wheelchair ramp to be installed, but the tenant would be the one to pay for the wheelchair ramp. It's for their benefit. They need the wheelchair ramp, so the cost of the wheelchair ramp would be borne by the tenant, number 1. And HUD also says this. And then the person who owns the rental property, if the accommodation or the modification to the property is going to change the property, you can also require that tenant then to return the property to its original condition when they move out. So, for example, tenant comes in, says, hey, I can't get up those 2 steps. I need a wheelchair ramp. Great. We would approve the wheelchair ramp, but Mr. Tenant, you have to pay for it. The owner of the property doesn't have the money. They're just making their mortgage payment, collecting the rent. They don't have the money to go install a wheelchair ramp. Tenant pays for it. And then we could also say, when you move out, Mr. Tenant, you have to remove the wheelchair ramp because the next person coming in may not want a wheelchair ramp installed in the front of their property. It's been the way it has always been, works pretty well. Well, HB 24-1318 changes that dramatically. And here's why that's important. Wheelchair ramp is pretty straightforward. But what if the tenant comes in and says this, hey, not only do I need a wheelchair ramp, but I need all the doors brought down, the handle. If I'm in a wheelchair, it's too high, I need the door brought down. HUD has guidance on where the door handle should be. HUD has guidance on things like grab bars in the showers. Pretty straightforward, grab bars in the showers. But what about doorways? What if they say, not only do I need the wheelchair ramp to get up to the front door, I need the front door to be widened. And I need all the kitchen counters brought down. I need the bathroom door widened. I need everything changed around. Well, in the past, that cost would be borne by who? The tenant side of things, because you can imagine that could get very, very expensive. Well, now with HB 23-1318, it changes things. Now in Colorado, the landlord must pay the cost of the modification to the property. The landlord pays for the wheelchair ramp. The landlord pays for the grab bars in the shower. And secondly, the landlord may not require the tenant to return the property to its original condition when they move out of the property. So now we have to go through that test. We still do the 3 criteria test, and we say, yes, it's approved, and the landlord, the property owner, you pay for the wheelchair ramp. You pay for the widening of the doors. Now, this can get very, very expensive for a small landlord who may just own 1 property, and a tenant comes in and says, hey, I need every countertop dropped 6 inches. I need every light switch brought down 6 inches. I need every door widened 8 inches. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars in these types of things. Do landlords have to pay for that? Well, per this law, yes, they would. Now, HUD also has, in part of that 3 criteria test I mentioned a moment ago, the reasonability test. That's part 3 of the test, is the request has to be reasonable. In the past, The financial obligation has never been part of the reasonability test because the tenant would be the one paying for it. What may happen, and this is not legal advice, you need to talk to your attorney, but what may happen is some landlords may say, well, gosh, I understand you want everything changed and widened and doors and counters, and that's fine, I'll approve it, but it's not reasonable for me to pay $30,000 to drop all the countertops in this little rental property that's renting for $1,000 a month. I don't have that money. I can't do it. So I'm going to have to say no. And the question remains, will that be considered unreasonable because of the financial burden that it would potentially place upon a landlord? That's our interpretation thus far. We'll see how this is adjudicated in some courts to see how this kind of plays out that way. Now, this goes into effect August 7th of 2024. So if you are a landlord in Colorado, you need to be aware of this if a tenant comes and makes these requests. Most of the requests that we typically see are pretty straightforward. They're for things like wheelchair ramps. They're for things like grab bars in showers. And our recommendation is always, yes, landlords and property owners, those are things you should be providing on behalf of your tenants if they need it. So again, this is not legal advice, but if we can be of a resource, jump on our website, rentgrace.com. We're happy to help here at Grace Property Management. Until next time, whether you're a tenant, whether you're an owner, we wish you success.